He offered her a marriage contract instead of a proposal. 5 rules: no love, no emotions, just business. But destiny never signs the same paper twice. Millionaire hid his pain behind wealth until a caregiver found his heart. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please subscribe, tap the notification bell, and tell me where you are watching from in the comments. Thank you, and now, let us return to our main character. Rain drummed softly against the glass wall of the high-rise conference room, blurring the Manhattan skyline into silver streaks. The air inside smelled of espresso and tension. Across the sleek marble table sat Ethan Ward, 32, self-made tech millionaire, immaculate in a charcoal suit that looked as though it had been tailored around his bones. He did not smile. He did not need to. Across from him, Sophie Lane clutched her worn leather folder like a shield. 26, a paralegal by day, drowning in medical bills and overdue rent. She had walked into this meeting expecting a job offer, something small, maybe temporary. Instead, the man in front of her had slid a crisp white folder across the table. "Marry me," he said, his voice calm, detached, as if he were asking her to sign for a delivery. Sophie blinked, thinking she misheard. "I am sorry, what?" Ethan leaned back, his eyes steady, unreadable. "I need a wife, on paper, for 6 months. You will be well compensated, everything you owe paid in full, and in return, you agree to my terms." Her pulse thundered in her ears. "This is a joke, right?" "No." His tone carried the finality of a signature. "My late father's will demands I be married before the next shareholders vote. Without that, I lose control of my company." He opened the folder again, revealing a formal contract printed in clean black lines. Each page looked like a cage made of ink. "Clause 1, he read, "no emotional attachment. Clause 2, you will appear with me at 5 public events. Clause 3, no interference in my personal life. Clause 4, absolute confidentiality. Clause 5, no questions about my past." The fluorescent light hummed overhead. Sophie's throat tightened. "You do realize how insane this sounds?" Ethan's gaze softened for the first time, just barely. "You need a way out, Miss Lane. I am offering one." Her eyes fell to the bottom of the document where a silver pen rested. She thought of her mother's hospital bills, the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, the voicemail she could not bring herself to open. Her voice trembled. "And after 6 months?" He paused. "You walk away. Free." A silence stretched between them, fragile and electric. Rain hit the glass harder, echoing her heartbeat. Finally, Sophie reached for the pen. When she signed her name, Ethan exhaled slow, controlled like a man who had just bought time, not love. He stood, buttoning his jacket. "Welcome to the arrangement, Mrs. Ward." The word Mrs. hung in the air like thunder. Sophie sat frozen, her signature still drying on the page, realizing she had just married a man she barely knew, one whose eyes hid a loneliness deeper than the storm outside. The next morning, Sophie woke up to the sound of rain against her apartment window again, but this time it felt heavier, more real. Her signature on the contract was not a dream. It was printed, sealed, and already delivered to Ethan Ward's legal department. She had sold 6 months of her life for survival. A sleek black car waited outside her building. The driver greeted her by name and handed her an envelope with her new identification. Inside were documents confirming her marriage to Ethan Ward and an address written in gold ink: Ward Tower, Penthouse 79. Her hands trembled. She had never even stepped inside a building like that, let alone lived there. The ride uptown was silent except for the rhythm of the rain and the quiet hum of the engine. When the elevator doors opened to the top floor, the scent of cedar and expensive cologne filled the air. Glass walls revealed the city stretching endlessly below. It did not look like a home. It looked like power carved into marble. Ethan was standing near the window, tie loosened, coffee in hand, his reflection flickering in the glass. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "You are on time," he said simply. "I was told punctuality is part of the contract," Sophie answered, clutching the strap of her purse. A faint smirk crossed his face. Good. Follow me. He led her through the apartment, polished floors, minimal furniture, everything in shades of gray. The silence between them was thick, but not hostile. At the dining table, a woman in a tailored suit waited, flipping through a tablet. "This is Mrs. Collins, my legal advisor," Ethan said. "She will brief you on the guidelines of our arrangement." Mrs. Collins looked at Sophie with a professional smile that did not reach her eyes. "Miss Lane, excuse me. Mrs. Ward, your primary duties are simple. Attend 5 official functions with Mr. Ward. Maintain a public image of mutual respect and companionship. No unauthorized media interaction. And of course, discretion is expected." Sophie nodded, her throat dry. "Understood," Ethan interjected, his voice even. "You will also have access to a personal assistant, a driver, and a clothing account. Presentation matters. The first event is the Carter Foundation Gala this Friday." Sophie hesitated. "That is in 3 days." He met her gaze. "Then I suggest you start preparing." After Mrs. Collins left, the room fell quiet again. Sophie turned to him. "Do you always talk like that? Like every sentence is a board meeting?" Ethan looked mildly surprised, then amused. "Old habits. Efficiency saves time." "Well," she said softly, "sometimes people are not spreadsheets, Mr. Ward." For a brief second, something in his expression shifted a shadow, maybe a memory, but it vanished just as quickly. "You will find your room at the end of the hall," he said. "There are clothes prepared in your size. Dinner is at 7. Attendance is expected." When he walked away, she exhaled the breath she did not realize she had been holding. The penthouse felt colder once he was gone. She found her way to the guest suite, which was larger than her entire apartment. On the bed lay a designer dress, still tagged, and a small jewelry box. Inside, a silver ring glimmered under the soft light, simple, elegant, undeniably expensive. It matched the one Ethan wore on his left hand. For a moment, she stared at it, tracing the smooth metal between her fingers. It was supposed to be a symbol of arrangement, not affection, but somehow it felt heavier than paper and ink. Sophie slipped the ring onto her finger, then looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection staring back did not look like the girl who counted coins for bus fare yesterday. This woman looked composed, rehearsed, almost unrecognizable. She whispered to her own reflection, "You wanted a miracle, Sophie. You just did not expect it to come with a contract." Outside the window, the storm had started to clear. The city lights flickered awake, golden and distant. Somewhere in that light, Ethan Ward was planning his next move, and Sophie could not yet see that their carefully signed boundaries were already beginning to blur. The next 3 days moved like a storm through Sophie's quiet life. Every hour was scheduled, every detail rehearsed. A stylist arrived with racks of designer gowns and whispered words like silhouette and presentation. A posture coach corrected her shoulders until they no longer slouched. Even her laughter was measured, practiced until it sounded effortless. At first, Sophie resisted. She felt like a prop being polished for display. But when she caught her reflection one night in the floor-length mirror, hair smooth, gown flowing like water she barely recognized herself. Maybe, she thought, becoming Mrs. Ward was a kind of armor. Maybe this was what survival looked like. Friday arrived faster than she expected. The Carter Foundation Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Langford, a hotel that gleamed like gold under the city lights. Cameras flashed at the entrance, catching every shimmer of silk and diamond. Ethan Ward stood beside her at the red carpet, calm and composed. His hand brushed hers just before they stepped into the light. "Smile," he murmured, not unkindly. "They are watching." Sophie smiled. The flashbulbs exploded. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers dripped like frozen stars. The air hummed with polite laughter and quiet deals disguised as compliments. Sophie followed Ethan's lead, greeting board members, investors, and socialites whose smiles were sharper than glass. Every time she faltered, Ethan's hand found the small of her back, steadying, guiding. At the center table, a woman approached, elegant, confident, with eyes that assessed before they greeted. "Ethan," she said smoothly, I did not expect to see you here with company. Ethan's jaw tightened. Sophie, this is Victoria Hayes, my former fiancée. Sophie extended a polite hand. It is nice to meet you. Victoria's smile did not reach her eyes. Of course, you are the new Mrs. Ward, quite the surprise. Sophie's fingers twitched, but she held her composure. Life is full of surprises. Ethan placed a hand on Sophie's chair, his tone even. Excuse us, Victoria. We have people to greet. As they walked away, Sophie could feel the heat rising in her face. You did not tell me your ex would be here, she whispered. I did not think it mattered, Ethan replied quietly. It matters when she looks at me like I am a charity project. Ethan glanced down at her, his expression unreadable. You handled her well, better than most would. Something in his voice unexpected. Respect softened the space between them. The rest of the evening unfolded like a carefully choreographed play. Sophie laughed when she was supposed to, raised her glass at the right moments, and never once lost her balance. But near the end of the night, an older investor made an inappropriate remark about her background, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. The laughter around them faltered. Before Sophie could respond, Ethan's voice cut through the noise. That is enough, Mr. Collins. My wife deserves the same respect as anyone in this room. The silence that followed was sharp. The investor muttered an apology, and Ethan guided Sophie away. When they reached the terrace, the cool night air hit her lungs like a breath she had forgotten she needed. You did not have to do that, she said softly. Yes, I did. His tone was quiet but firm. If people question my choices, that is fine, but they will not belittle you. For the first time since signing that contract, Sophie believed him. She looked at him, not the billionaire, not the boss, but the man who had just stood up for her without a second thought. Ethan met her gaze, and for a brief moment, the wall between them cracked. The city glittered below, alive and endless, and neither of them spoke. Finally, he said, You were brilliant tonight. Her lips curved in a small, genuine smile. Thank you, Mr. Ward. Ethan, he corrected gently. The night breeze carried her answer. Good night, Ethan. As she walked back inside, he stayed on the terrace, staring at the skyline. For a man who built his world on rules and contracts, one thought unsettled him more than any deal ever had. He was starting to care about his wife. The weekend after the gala, the penthouse felt different. Softer somehow. The silence was no longer heavy, only thoughtful. Sophie moved carefully through the space, no longer afraid to touch things. She brewed coffee, left the faint scent of vanilla in the kitchen, and placed a small vase of daisies on the counter. Ethan noticed but did not comment. He simply stood there one morning, coffee in hand, and asked, You like flowers? She smiled. They make cold rooms feel human. He looked at her for a moment, then turned away, but his voice carried something quieter. Keep them wherever you want. By Monday, their routine had settled into an unspoken rhythm. They shared breakfast at opposite ends of the long table, brief nods between spoonfuls of oatmeal and lines of emails. In the evenings, Ethan worked in his study while Sophie read or watched the city from the balcony. Yet, there were moments, small, almost invisible, when something shifted. One night, as she walked past his office, she heard the sound of piano keys. The melody was slow, haunting, full of emotion he never showed in words. She stopped by the door, listening. When he realized she was there, he froze, hands still on the keys. I did not know you played, she said softly. It is not something I do often, he replied, his tone guarded. It is beautiful, she said. What is it called? He hesitated, eyes fixed on the piano. A song I wrote for someone I lost. Sophie nodded, the words settling like dust between them. She did not ask more. She just sat quietly on the nearby couch, letting the music fill the space where questions might have been. Over the next few weeks, they attended more events together. Each one was easier than the last. The business world now accepted their marriage as fact, not headline. Sophie found herself laughing genuinely at Ethan's rare, dry humor, and he began to ask about her life before the contract. She told him about her mother, her childhood in a small town, her dream of becoming a lawyer. One evening after a charity dinner, as their car glided through the city lights, Ethan asked, "Do you miss it? The life you had before this?" Sophie looked out the window. "I miss being certain of who I was, but certainty does not pay hospital bills." He said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, "You are stronger than most people I know." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. For the first time, she believed that he saw her not as a business solution, but as a person. Later that week, they attended a board dinner at Ward Enterprises. Everything went smoothly until an unexpected guest arrived, Victoria Hayes, the ex-fiancée. She smiled sweetly, her eyes sharp. "Ethan, you never told me marriage suited you so well." Ethan's hand tensed at his side, but Sophie touched his arm gently under the table. Her calm gaze met Victoria's. "It suits him when it is real," she said with quiet confidence. Victoria's smile faltered. The rest of the table exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan turned to Sophie, surprise flickering behind his composure. "Excuse us," he said, guiding her away before the tension could grow. Outside the dining hall, under the warm lights of the corridor, he exhaled. "You did not have to do that." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." Ethan studied her, eyes unreadable. "You keep doing that, breaking rules I never knew I made." Sophie smiled faintly. "Maybe you wrote too many." For a moment, his expression softened, and the distance between them felt dangerously small. His voice was low. "You are not like anyone I have ever met." The air between them trembled. Then he stepped back, his control snapping back into place. "Good night, Sophie." She watched him walk away, her heart uncertain but alive. In that instant, she understood what frightened him most. It was not losing his company, it was losing control. Back in her room, she removed her jewelry, set the silver ring on the dresser, and stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was no longer pretending. Somewhere between the lies and the late-night piano songs, something real had begun to grow, and neither of them knew how to stop it. The following week began quietly, but nothing about the silence felt simple anymore. Ethan had started lingering near the kitchen in the mornings, asking about her plans, instead of disappearing behind his schedule. Sophie tried not to notice, but the shift was impossible to ignore. The man who once measured his words like currency now asked about her mother's recovery, her favorite books, even how she liked her coffee. One afternoon, she found him in the study surrounded by paperwork. He looked exhausted, sleeves rolled up, tie abandoned on the desk. Without thinking, she placed a cup of black coffee beside him. "You should rest," she said softly. He looked up, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "You do realize no one ever tells me that? That is probably why you never do," she replied. He gave a quiet laugh, the sound low and unfamiliar. "You are a strange woman, Mrs. Ward. Then it is a good thing you married me," she said, meaning it as a joke, but the way his eyes lingered on hers made her heart stumble. The following Friday brought another event, this time a charity art auction hosted by Ward Enterprises. Sophie wore a dark emerald gown that shimmered under the lights, and Ethan, for once, looked at her like the rest of the room had disappeared. When they entered the hall together, conversations paused, whispers followed, but neither of them noticed. The evening seemed perfect until halfway through the event, when Victoria appeared again. She approached the stage where Sophie stood beside Ethan, smiling sweetly for the cameras. "You play the part well," Victoria said, under her breath. "But I wonder how long he can keep pretending." Sophie met her gaze calmly. "Pretending does not build what we have. Victoria, integrity does." Ethan turned toward them, his tone sharp. "That is enough." His public composure cracked for the first time, and every camera caught it. The crowd's whisper swelled. Sophie's pulse raced. When the lights dimmed for the next auction item, Ethan leaned closer, voice low. "I am sorry. She should never have spoken to you like that." "It is fine," Sophie said quietly. "People only see what they choose to." He looked at her for a long moment, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then I wish they could see what I do." After the event, the car ride home was silent. The city lights passed like brief memories through the tinted glass. Finally, Ethan said, "You were remarkable tonight." Sophie turned to him. "You keep saying that. I'm beginning to think you mean it." "I do," he said simply. You make things easier. You make this life less empty. The sincerity in his tone disarmed her completely. She wanted to speak, to tell him how her heartbeat still stumbled every time he looked at her, but before she could, the car slowed in front of the penthouse. Inside, she went straight to her room, trying to steady her thoughts. A knock on the door interrupted her. Ethan stood there, no suit jacket, no guard in his expression. He held out a small silver key. "This opens the north room," he said. "It was my mother's art studio. No one has entered it in years. I think she would have liked you." Sophie hesitated before taking it. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I want you to feel at home," he answered. Then, after a pause, "Because I trust you." When he left, Sophie sat on the edge of her bed, the key resting in her palm. She realized that somewhere between contracts and headlines, he had begun breaking his own rules, and she was breaking hers by caring too much. That night, she unlocked the north room. The scent of old paint and dust filled the air. Sunlight from the city spilled across half-finished canvases. On one of them, a single word had been written in faded ink: "Believe." Sophie touched the edge of the canvas and whispered, "Maybe I finally do." She did not notice that Ethan stood quietly in the hallway, watching her with the same look he once reserved for his empire, something between awe and fear of losing it. If this fake marriage universe pulls you in, subscribe now so you never miss the next chapter. The following days unfolded like a quiet storm that no one could name. The rhythm between Sophie and Ethan had shifted once more, this time in a way neither of them dared to define. Every shared glance lasted a second too long. Every accidental touch carried a weight that neither contract nor logic could hold back. One evening, as rain returned to the city, Sophie found herself in the north room again. The lights from the skyline poured through the glass, painting her silhouette in gold. She had begun restoring one of the old canvases, brushing away the dust from color that had not seen daylight in years. She was so lost in the motion that she did not hear Ethan enter until his reflection appeared beside hers in the window. "I see you found her favorite painting," he said quietly. Sophie turned, startled. "I hope you do not mind. I just thought it deserved to breathe again." He stepped closer, eyes softening. "My mother painted that when she was sick. She said art was how she remembered she was still alive." Sophie set the brush down gently. "Then maybe that is what you need too. A reminder." Ethan's voice dropped. "And what would remind me?" "Whatever you let yourself feel," she said. The words hung in the air between them, fragile but true. Ethan's usual composure faltered. For a moment, he looked not like a billionaire, not like a man hiding behind contracts, but like someone who had been lonely for too long. He reached out slowly, brushing a streak of paint from her wrist. "You should not stay in this room alone," he murmured. "Maybe I am not," she replied, and the world went still. The next morning, everything seemed brighter, but the fragile peace did not last. When Sophie stepped into the living room, she saw Ethan speaking with Mrs. Collins, his legal advisor. Papers were scattered across the table. The tension in the air was unmistakable. Mrs. Collins glanced at Sophie, then at Ethan. "You should tell her," she said, her tone clipped. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sophie, there is something you need to know." Her stomach tightened. "What is it?" He handed her a file official, heavy. "The board is preparing to challenge my leadership. Someone leaked information about our marriage contract. They want proof it is real, or I lose everything." Sophie's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were printed screenshots, emails, and a headline that made her breath catch. "Ward's fake bride, scandal at the top." Her voice was a whisper. "Who did this?" "We are not certain," Ethan said, "but it was deliberate. Someone wants to destroy both of us." She looked at him, pain flashing across her face. "You think I had something to do with it?" His expression tightened. "No, but they will." That night, the penthouse felt smaller, colder. Reporters gathered outside the tower. Calls came non-stop. Sophie sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the ring that once symbolized survival and now felt like a target. Ethan entered quietly. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his exhaustion etched deep. "I can fix this," he said, almost to himself. I always fix things. Sophie looked up, her voice steady but heavy. You cannot fix people, Ethan. You can only choose them. He froze, her words sinking in. You said you trusted me, she continued. So trust me now. We tell the truth. No more hiding behind papers. Ethan's shoulders lowered, and for the first time, he nodded without argument. Tomorrow, he said. We face them together. When he left the room, Sophie sat in the dim light, watching the storm break, open beyond the glass. She did not know what the morning would bring, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever this had become, it was no longer pretend. 2 new millionaire stories every day. Subscribe now to stay with this universe. Morning came wrapped in headlines. Every television screen, every news ticker, every phone notification carried the same words. Ward Enterprises under fire. CEO's marriage exposed. The world had turned their private arrangement into public judgment overnight. Ethan stood by the window, his suit impeccable but his eyes hollow. Sophie watched from across the room, her stomach knotted. They are waiting downstairs, he said quietly. The board, the press, everyone. Then we go, she replied. Together. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, the noise hit them like a wave, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. Ethan placed a steady hand on Sophie's back, guiding her through the chaos. Inside the conference room, the members of the board sat in rigid silence. Mrs. Collins was there too, her expression sharp with worry. The chairman spoke first. Mr. Ward, these photos, this contract, are they genuine? Ethan's jaw tightened. Yes, he said. The contract is real. Murmurs erupted across the room. Sophie's heart pounded, but Ethan continued, his voice firm. It began as a legal arrangement. I will not deny that. But it did not stay that way. What started as necessity became something I will not apologize for, something real. He turned toward Sophie, and in that single look, the room disappeared. I broke every rule I wrote, he said softly. The silence that followed was heavier than judgment. Mrs. Collins cleared her throat. We can present evidence that the leak originated from an external source, possibly a rival investor. The chairman nodded slowly. Then we suspend the vote until verification. When the meeting ended, Ethan reached for Sophie's hand. You did not have to stand here with me, he said quietly. Yes, I did, she answered, because you finally stopped hiding. Outside the tower, the storm had lifted. The crowd of reporters was still there, but the sound had dulled to a distant hum. Sophie looked up at the city that had once made her feel small. Now it only seemed wide open. Ethan exhaled, the first real breath he had taken in days. Whatever happens next, he said, we face it on our terms. Sophie smiled faintly. That is the first thing you have said that does not sound like a contract. He laughed under his breath, the sound raw but alive. For the first time since the paper was signed, they walked out not as CEO and obligation, but as 2 people who finally meant it. By the next afternoon, the truth had begun to surface. Mrs. Collins delivered the results of the investigation, emails, payments, and forged documents that traced the leak back to a rival investor named Raymond Hale. He had hoped to take Ethan's position by using the scandal as leverage. Ethan listened in silence, his expression unreadable as the evidence spread across the conference table. So it was all business to him, he said quietly. He tried to buy what he could not earn. Sophie stood beside him, calm but determined. Then it is time for you to show them who you really are. That evening, Ethan called a press conference at the Ward Foundation Hall. The same cameras that once chased them now filled the room again, lights blazing. Reporters leaned forward, waiting for a defensive statement, an excuse, maybe even an apology. But Ethan did not give them any of those. He stepped up to the podium, Sophie at his side, and began with steady conviction. Yes, my marriage began as a contract. I made that choice under pressure, out of fear, and out of pride. But what I found was something no contract could define: trust, compassion, and truth. He paused, then turned to Sophie. This woman stood beside me when I was too proud to ask for help. She did not marry my fortune. She restored my faith. The cameras clicked endlessly, but no flash could capture the stillness that fell over the room. Ethan continued, "Ward Enterprises will remain under my leadership, and we will launch a foundation in Sophie's name dedicated to supporting women who face financial hardship. Integrity built this company, and integrity will save it." Applause started slowly, then grew until the hall vibrated with it. The same headlines that had torn him apart now rewrote themselves in real time. After the conference, Ethan and Sophie stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered like tiny promises. Sophie looked up at him, eyes shining. "You could have stayed silent," she said. "I have done enough of that in my life," he replied. It was time to speak the truth. He reached into his pocket and took out the silver ring that had started everything. "I do not want this to represent a deal anymore," he said. "I want it to mean choice." Sophie's breath caught. "Ethan." He slipped the ring back onto her finger, this time with no papers, no witnesses, and no conditions. "I broke every clause for you," he said softly, "and I would do it again." Somewhere behind them, the city applauded with its lights, and the storm that had once surrounded their names faded into something gentler, something real. A few weeks later, the city had already moved on to its next headline, but for Ethan and Sophie, life had finally slowed to something real. The press no longer camped outside the building. The board had voted unanimously to keep Ethan as CEO, and the foundation bearing Sophie's name was already helping its first families. The penthouse, once cold and silent, now carried the faint hum of a home. Sophie's art supplies covered one corner of the living room, and fresh daisies bloomed on the counter every morning. Ethan had begun leaving his office door open, letting the sound of her laughter drift through the halls. One Saturday afternoon, sunlight streamed across the marble floor as Sophie painted by the window. Ethan walked in, his sleeves rolled up, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You know," he said, "for someone who once signed a contract to stay only 6 months, you have lasted longer than any board agreement I have ever made." She smiled without looking up. "That is because this one was not written on paper." He set the cups down and stood behind her, watching the way the light touched her hair. "Do you ever regret saying yes that day?" he asked quietly. Sophie turned, meeting his eyes. "If I had said no, I would still be waiting for my life to start. You just gave it an unexpected beginning." Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that came from peace, not power. He reached for her hand, lifting it gently. "Then let us begin properly this time." She frowned playfully. "Properly?" He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring, not silver, not part of any deal, but gold and simple. "No contracts, no deadlines, just choice," he said. "Will you marry me for real, Sophie Lane Ward?" Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. The city outside kept moving, but inside that quiet room, it felt like time finally stopped keeping score. Months later, under a canopy of lights at the Ward Foundation's annual gala, they stood together again, this time not pretending. Ethan raised a glass and said to the crowd, "Some deals build empires, others build lives. I chose the second, and I would choose it again." Applause filled the room. Sophie looked at him, the same man who once measured everything in profit, now standing before her as proof that love could rewrite even the most perfect contract. If you want more Untold Billionaire love, subscribe and choose your next chapter on screen.